Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at Noon, the U.S. and its allies say they are prepared to launch a military strike against the Syrian government for last week's chemical attack on civilians. The White House, however, says toppling the Assad regime is not its goal. U.S. Human Rights Envoy Robert King will visit Pyongyang on Friday to negotiate the release of Korean-American Kenneth Bae, sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in North Korea. Plus, the Korean government will unveil a stimulus package later today to encourage home buying and ease the interest burden on low-income renters. These stories and more on Newsline at Noon.
Where's the best place for bibimbap?
Les Jeux Olympiques d'hiver se dérouleront-ils à Pyeongchang?
هل أنتم حقاً سابع أكبر مصدر في العالم؟
この歌手は誰ですか？你好，最近哪部电视剧的人气最旺？
Korea is attracting interest from around the world. The more you know, the more you want to know. Dynamic Korea.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at Noon. I'm Choi Yusan in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. It looks like Kenneth Bae, the Korean-American who has been detained in North Korea for nearly 10 months now, will be freed soon.
U.S. Human Rights Envoy Robert King will visit the North this Friday to ask for his release on humanitarian grounds. Our Han-dan reports.
The U.S. State Department and the White House say Special Envoy for North Korean human rights issues Robert King will travel to Pyongyang on Friday to free Kenneth Bae, who has been detained in the reclusive state since November last year. During the visit, Bae is likely to be released from prison and brought back home with Ambassador King the next day. The missionary and tourism operator had been accused of participating in activities designed to overthrow the North Korean leadership by infiltrating at least 250 students into the country. North Korea has reportedly invited top U.S. officials to visit Pyongyang regarding the issue through the New York Channel, a diplomatic line set up between Washington and Pyongyang. During a humanitarian trip to Asia this week, King said the U.S. had continuously requested for Bae's release.
We've requested the North release Mr. Bae on humanitarian grounds. His health is suffering, and we've requested that he be released. We hope that they will listen to our request.
Although the U.S. envoy's talks with his North Korean counterparts will likely be limited to the issue of Kenneth Bae, experts say King's visit may help in easing the standoff between Washington and Pyongyang. This is the first visit to Pyongyang by a top U.S. official since young leader Kim Jong-un succeeded power. In fact, not long after King's last visit to the North in 2011 to free American citizen Eddie Chun, the two countries held high-level talks and discussed North Korea's denuclearization as well as food aid. And as his visit comes amid a series of inter-Korean talks, hopes are high that the elevated tensions on the Korean peninsula may further cool off. Han-dan, Arirang News.
In its latest conciliatory gesture towards Pyongyang, the South Korean government has suggested the two Koreas discuss their suspended tourism operation at Mount Kumgang in early October. Seoul says next month's inter-Korean family reunions and efforts underway to revive joint factory operations at Kaesong should be handled first. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The South Korean government has offered October 2nd as the date to hold working-level talks with North Korea over the reopening of the Mount Kumgang resort to South Korean tourists. South Korea's Unification Ministry sent a statement to the North on Tuesday afternoon through its communication channel at Panmunjom. North Korea has not yet responded to the counteroffer. Unification Ministry officials cited technical reasons for the proposed date in early October, which comes 1 week after the date initially proposed by the South.
We have two agreements to deal with at the moment: the reunions of separated families and the resumption of operations at the Inter-Korean Gaesong Industrial Complex.
South Korean officials say they are still carrying out measures that were agreed upon during working-level talks over family reunions and want to deal with one issue at a time. They also pointed out that preparations for a resumption of operations at the Gaesong Industrial Complex are also underway. Seoul has arranged for a group of inspectors to head to Mount Kumgang for 2 days starting Wednesday, where the family reunions are to take place late next month. The South Korean government regards the reopening of the Mount Kumgang tour issue as being separate from the reunions of the separated families, while Pyongyang has tried to lump them together. North Korea asked for working-level talks for Mount Kumgang tours to be held later this month or in early September. South Korean tours to the Mount Kumgang resort were suspended in 2008 after a South Korean tourist was shot dead by a North Korean soldier. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Red Cross officials here in South Korea are busy preparing for next month's inter-Korean family reunions at the North's Mount Kumgang resort. Out of the tens of thousands of families registered for reunions, it's a sad reality that only 100 will have the chance to see their loved ones again this time around. Our Connie Lee has more on the selection process.
Fathers separated from their wives and children. Brothers and sisters split from one another more than 60 years ago.
We're looking for our older brother, Kim Nang-guk. He was taken away during the war by the North Korean military at the age of 19.
It's a harsh reality for families who were separated by the Korean War.
As I've gotten older and since my children have grown and left, I now have this longing to see my own family. I don't know if they'll be found, but it's worth a try.
But unfortunately, most of these people here at Korea's Red Cross will not be selected to reunite with their loved ones come September. There are currently about 72,000 registered separated family members in South Korea, but only a fraction, just 100 of them, will be selected to reunite with their loved ones on September 25th through the 30th at Mount Kumgang in North Korea. The first round of cuts was made through a computer process that filtered out the younger candidates and gave priority to those who were either looking for a child or spouse. Come Thursday, another cut. The list will be whittled down to about 200 after various health exams of the candidates to make sure they are well enough to travel to Mount Kumgang. Once that happens, South Korea's Red Cross will exchange its list with North Korea to confirm whether the family members they're looking for are indeed alive. Then, the final list of 100.
It usually takes us 50 days to get ready for the reunions, but we will get everything together in a month. We are speeding up the preparation process this year.
But time is running out for many of these separated family members. Data show that out of those who are still living, 80%, or about 60,000 of them, are over the age of 70.
I just hope to see them before I die. When I see my siblings, what could I possibly say? I'll probably just hold them, hug them, before saying goodbye again.
Connie Lee, Arirang News.
North Korean officials will soon visit Panama to meet with the 35 sailors who have been detained there since their ship was seized last month for smuggling Cuban weapons through the Panama Canal. Panamanian Foreign Minister Fernando Nunes said Tuesday that visas were issued to a North Korean delegation and that the group could receive them as early as Wednesday. The sailors have been accused of arms trafficking, which carries a maximum sentence of up to 12 years in prison. The vessel, the Cheonggang, was headed from Cuba to North Korea when it was detained on July 15th on suspicion of carrying drugs. President Park Geun-hye is meeting with the leaders of Korea's 10 largest conglomerates over lunch today to discuss pending economic issues and ways to revitalize the economy. This is the first time President Park has separately met with the business leaders, including Samsung Electronics Chairman Lee Gun-hee and Hyundai Motor Group Chairman Jung Mong-gu. The president will call on the conglomerates to help her attain her main goal of boosting the economy and creating jobs. The luncheon is also aimed at encouraging the companies to actively engage in business activities and investment. That slowed after the Park administration put emphasis on economic democratization.
The government will announce plans later today designed to revitalize the nation's housing market. The main points will likely include reducing the home acquisition tax and increasing the number of rental homes available. Our Yurian has the details.
The main goal of the government's housing plan is to encourage home buying and to stabilize rental prices that have been soaring in recent years. The problem in Korea's housing market centers around the unique Korean housing system called jeonse, requiring renters to deposit a large key money with landlords that are paid back when lease contracts expire. Jeonse prices have skyrocketed recently to well over 2/3 of the value of homes themselves. Experts attribute the exorbitant jeonse prices to potential buyers trying to avoid purchasing homes out of fear that housing prices may tumble. In an attempt to stimulate demand, the government is expected to lower taxes for home purchases. For homes valued at or under 600 million won, or roughly $530,000, those in most demand, the government will cut property acquisition tax by 1 percentage point to 1%. Home seekers will also be able to get mortgage loans for home purchases at a cheaper price. The government will work to increase the number of homes available by supplying more public rental houses. It is pushing the state-run Korea Land and Housing Corporation to bring forward the release of thousands of rental homes currently being built. Also, the government is expected to increase tax deductions for monthly renters to lessen the financial burden on people switching from jeonse to monthly rent. Yurian, Arirang News.
The Business Sentiment Index for Korea's manufacturers improved to a 3-month high in September's outlook. According to the central bank's monthly survey, projections on business conditions went up 4 points to 77 for September, the highest since the figure stood at 79 for the month of June. A reading below the benchmark 100 means that experts are more pessimistic than optimistic of the outlook. The Korean economy grew the fastest in over 2 years, increasing 1.1% in the second quarter. The Bank of Korea conducted a survey on roughly 2,600 companies nationwide in mid-August.
Japanese media outlets are reporting that nuclear authorities in Japan were unaware highly contaminated water was leaking from a tank at the Fukushima nuclear plant for some time. Citing a meeting led by plant operator TEPCO, Asahi Shimbun says the water leak, some 300 tons a day, likely started early last month at the latest. During the meeting, TEPCO reportedly explained the amount of radiation workers were exposed to some 20 meters from the tank suddenly increased in mid-July. Kyodo News reports the steep increase in exposure began around July 9th. Last Tuesday, TEPCO admitted at least 300 tons of highly radioactive water a day was seeping into the Pacific Ocean from a storage tank at the plant. Now, although the Japanese government has vowed to come up with measures to tackle the radioactive water leak, the situation may be worse than thought, as studies from last year indicate that radioactive water will contaminate the entire Pacific Ocean in just 6 years. Kim Min-ji reports.
This graphic shows the gradual contamination of the Pacific Ocean due to leaks of radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. The simulation, which was run by a German marine research institute, shows the entire Pacific waters being polluted by radioactive water in just 6 years. Although the results failed to grab attention when first released last year, experts now fear that the hypothesis may become a scary reality after the Japanese government recently admitted that some 300 tons of radioactive water have leaked into the ocean. Misei Murata, a former Japanese ambassador to Switzerland, criticized the Japanese government and the operator of the crippled nuclear plant, Tokyo Electric Power Corporation, for its handling of the situation.
TEPCO recently admitted to leaks of radioactive water. The amount is much more that the simulation had taken into account.
The international community has also voiced concerns over the issue, but Tokyo, meanwhile, is busy drumming up support for its bid in hosting the 2020 Olympics.
2020 Tokyo, let's do well.
Murata stressed the fact that Japan does not realize the gravity of the issue is more outrageous.
If Japan can secure the safety of its own nation, it is being insincere in hosting an international event like the Olympics. It should step out.
A Russian nuclear research center had also advised TEPCO to take measures 2 years ago, just after the accident broke out, but Japan turned down the suggestion. It's now been 2 years and 5 months since the nuclear crisis, and Tokyo has finally set out to deal with the problem. However, experts say that it may be too late. The former ambassador also warned that Japan may lose its rights in its exclusive economic zone if it fails to block the leakage into the 200 nautical mile zone. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
For your fill of Korean and international news, join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at Noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
Military action against Syria by Western powers seems imminent in the wake of last week's alleged chemical weapons attack near Damascus. The U.S. says it is ready to strike at any given moment, but denies its intention is to topple the Assad regime. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The United States and its allies have told rebel forces in Syria that military action against the Syrian government could be conducted within days. According to Reuters, diplomats from the U.S. and other Western countries warned Syrian opposition leaders at a meeting in Istanbul that military action was about to start and told them to be ready for talks if the government wants to negotiate with them. The U.S. says its forces in the region are ready to strike at any moment and are just waiting for President Obama to give it the go-ahead. The Obama administration insists it is still considering various options and is not trying to force regime change in Damascus.
The options that we are considering are not about regime change. They are about responding to a clear violation of an international standard that prohibits the use of chemical weapons.
British Prime Minister David Cameron says Britain wants to punish the Assad regime for using chemical weapons, but he's keen to avoid getting sucked into a wider conflict. Meanwhile, the Arab League has blamed Assad for last week's chemical attack and urged the UN Security Council to act. Experts say the announcement could potentially give diplomatic cover to Western powers if they choose to attack. Technically, the U.S. could legally launch military action against Syria without UN backing if NATO gives the strike the green light. UN backing for any military action is highly unlikely given that Russia, one of Assad's staunchest allies, has veto power at the Security Council. NATO is scheduled to convene an emergency meeting on Thursday to discuss its stance on the matter. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
The geopolitical uncertainty stemming from what is about to happen in Syria over the next few days and weeks has shunned oil prices to a 6-month high and sent global markets into a tailspin. Brent crude futures finished at slightly over $114 a barrel Tuesday, up almost 3.3%, its biggest daily percentage gain since early May. Oil prices rose on fears U.S.-led military action against Syria could destabilize the Middle East, which pumps a third of the world's oil. The heightened risks also caused U.S. and European markets to take a hit, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average dipping 170 points, or 1.1%. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq shed 1.6% and 2.2% respectively. Staying with Syria, the World Health Organization has set up new guidelines for treating victims of chemical weapons attacks. WHO spokesperson Glenn Thomas said the new guidelines are meant to help medical workers in Syria better treat their patients. The guidelines, which provide more detail of the risks of chemical agents, also include information related to the symptoms when exposed to nerve agents such as tabun, sarin, and VX.
Facebook has revealed for the first time the amount of times government agencies around the world have requested user information, and it makes quite worrying reading. In its Global Government's Requests report released Tuesday, Facebook says 74 countries asked for information about some 38,000 users in the first 6 months of the year. The US made by far the most requests, asking for information on over 20,000 people, to which Facebook complied in 79% of cases. Facebook says it will release similar reports every 6 months from now on to make sure users understand the nature and extent of the requests it receives and the strict policies and processes it has in place to handle them. The Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra, one of the oldest and most renowned orchestras in Korea, is preparing to record and release its 7th album during a concert that will be held later this week. Our cultural correspondent Park Ji-won takes us behind the scenes of the rehearsal.
Dozens of the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra members are busy rehearsing for a 2-day concert that will go on stage later this week. Korea's leading orchestra and maestro Jang Myung-hoon will present Mahler's Symphony No. 9 at the concert. This concert will also be recorded live and released as the orchestra's 7th album through the most prestigious classical music label, Deutsche Grammophon. The orchestra signed a contract with Deutsche Grammophon in 2011 to release 10 albums over 5 years, making it the first time that an Asian orchestra has signed such an extensive contract.
Among the things that the orchestra has achieved so far, this recording contract and the records that we have made are perhaps the biggest accomplishment. Not only Asian orchestra, today there are not many orchestras in the world that do these kind of recordings, and so I'm very proud of them.
The orchestra has developed greatly over the past 80 years, with maestro Jang Myung-hoon taking the lead.
To be able to record for Deutsche Grammophon this main stream repertoire, such as Beethoven 5th Symphony, 9th Symphony, Mahler 1st Symphony, 2nd Symphony, and now Mahler 9th Symphony. There is virtually no orchestra in the world that does that today. And so that is a testament to the great development.
The concert will be held on this Thursday and Friday evening at the Seoul Arts Center. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Okay, it's that time of our newscast where we get a check on the weather with our very nice weathercaster Lee Ji-yeon, who's standing by at the Weather Center. Good afternoon to you, Ji-yeon.
Well, hello there, guys. Now the full season starts in the fall, and it looks like we are off to a pretty typical pattern in terms of temperatures and weather conditions.
Yes, I noticed already there's a big fluctuation in temperatures during the day and nighttime.
And this is one of the times of the year where you have to be especially careful not to catch a cold, of course. So it's pretty important to take vitamins and get a lot of rest, isn't it, Ji-yeon?
Absolutely, and those are great ways to boost the immune system. And to add, for children, make sure they wash their hands frequently and try to disinfect their toys more frequently as well. Now, today's weather condition will be much like yesterday. We'll see temperatures in the lower 30s across the region in the afternoon, with partly to mostly sunny skies. While the most of the morning fog has burned off here in the central region, and the sky is much brighter for those heading out on their lunch break, but more clouds will be moving into Seoul and the surrounding areas towards the midday. But today should be the last day of summer-like weather because nationwide rain tomorrow will drag down the temperatures. It will start to rain from central provinces early in the morning, then spread to southern regions later in the afternoon. But all the rain should let up in the central region by tomorrow evening, but down south, it's likely to be affected by till Friday afternoon. So enjoy what might be the last hot and sunny afternoon today. With that, let's take a look at today's readings. Now, Seoul will rise to 31 degrees Celsius, that's 88 degrees in Fahrenheit, and Daegu and Gwangju will hike up to 32 with a good amount of sunshine, and 30 is the afternoon highs for Busan. Now, let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju and Daejeon will climb to the lower 30s, while Dokdo and Mount Keungang will stay nice and breezy in the 20s. Now, that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. That's all I have for you today. Enjoy your lunch break and have a great rest of the day. Now back to Yusun and Mark in the studio.
Thank you very much as always, Jian, and those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Join us tomorrow at the same time at noon here in Seoul.